Okay, this is a somewhat short one here, but this is on Seti the first, but also on basic all Egyptians through the entire dynasties they have here. And I was told by somebody that Seti was a black man. At least he's black. And I'm like, wow, because what's weird is I have dissertation papers that are very long that go into the depth on just him and his royal lineages during that 19th dynasty that says that he is one of the better kept mummies out of all of them, and that it captured his Caucasoid appearance and his aquiline nose and all of these type of things. We'll look at a picture of him in a second, but here's a picture from an Egyptian wall that's been knocked off, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, there's 1,000 words I could say about this picture alone, and could go on and on and on about it, but one thing I want to note is a new headdress is at about this time, which contains the sun in it, in a crest, and there are four snakes sticking off either side, and it really starts to look like the guy's got a chandelier on his head. Isn't that odd? And his sash here has a certain number of bands on it, and this corresponds to the planets that are known, the 5 and 2 major deities, and also the number of months in the year by 12 that they already had figured out in their lunar calendar, that based off of the zodiac, which is also based on 12. And all this comes from Sumeria, where they based it everything on 6, 12, base 10, which is 60. And so we get 360 degrees, we get 90 degrees to an angle, we get 12 hours in a day, which here are or Horus. Horus is shown to have 12 steps, and there are 12 hours in the day, and so on. They're right here at the equator too, so there's not much variance in that. Now they don't have stopwatches or anything, people, but they're going through that effect, and that's the symbolism. Negrocentrics would like to believe that Egyptians were black people for some reason. I guess, of course, we know the Egyptians don't have any ties to the sub-Saharan Africans whatsoever. So why they really desperately do this, I don't know. Maybe they just want some black people somewhere to have done something, but they were these people's primordial enemies. Now, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Let's look at this real quick, because what we're looking at is a tan man here that lives now the equator and half naked all day long, and he symbolizes that he does all the work, so he's tanned, and yet their wives and women, in most cases, are pale. And this symbolizes the fact that she didn't have to work. She stays indoors. She does her woman things and beauty things and thinks of things to beautify the country and do all these type of things where she's not, and watching her kids and doing the things she has to do, so she doesn't have to work. The male is the provider. This is a symbolism that is brand new to the world at this point, pretty much. It doesn't, uh, did cavemen act like this? Keep a woman in a cave or something? Or was that keep them in a cave kind of a different idea from somebody else trying to steal your woman? Or how does all this play out between then and now? Well, you'll find that all the people through this area, through Samaria, all the way up to the north, and even in the caste system that's in India, that the lighter or paler people were the nobility. And the one easy way for that to have happened is that they didn't have to work for a living. It was the people that were the farmers that were doing that. So you get a farmer who's out all day and he's a redneck and dark like this. Then you get a sometime in and out guy and they're somewhat tan. You take somebody's indoors all the time and they really have this real pale appearance, which can be nothing other than a Caucasian. So if his wife's a Caucasian, then they have a mulatto kid, right? They don't have, well, that's not a black man in the first place. That's just a tan symbolic man. And that's about the end of that. It's a symbolism they use. It's something Negroids couldn't possibly mimic or pull off. So that kind of ends that entire thing. And it starts from the earliest pictures of them through all the way to the 24th dynasty, when Nubians do actually take over in a time of strife. It lasts for 70 years. And it's known as the precursor to the downfall of Egypt, and it never recovered. Just 70 years. Didn't take long. But in this picture, you see somebody's hand sticking out, and this also is a priest who's reaching out to him, one arm behind him, one arm there. Oddly, it shows hands on his shoulders. And I'm not sure if this is supposed to be from that arm, but you can't get that effect from there. She might have to be reaching across to here, and this one's reaching across to there, but neither of their arms are long enough to do so. So it's a misperspective, and you can kind of see that. But it's okay. This is a priest, and the priests were generally indoors and not out farming, of course, and so they're pale just like the women. And you see a lot of men that are very pale like that, and they're shown that they're priests, so they do that. Now, the man of the family and the man of the king is shown as doing things. All the way up through the English kings, where the guys were wearing their suits of armor and doing things, and they weren't the guys out at battle in most cases. In fact, in most cases, they weren't even there. Like King George killing the dragon, the story goes that somebody else killed it, and he showed up 2 days later, walked up, stuck his sword in it, and said, "I, George, King of England, Dragon Slayer." No, you didn't kill anything, but okay, well, it happened under your reign or whatever it is, so you have those type of effects. But yeah, there's no way that you can get pale wives, and there's no black women that look like this. And by the way, you can't grow out your hair this long if you have nappy hair like black people have. In fact, it takes modern chemicals, and you have to put the thing that gives a white person a tight permanent in your hair, and it will straighten out their hair. That's how kinky it is. It actually relaxes the hair. And then you can press it out and do things. Now, why would a black people that can't grow hair like this wear wigs that mimic this style? And that would be just silly, unless you say, oh, well, they're mimicking white people? Really? Is that what you want to go with? Well, up under here, whenever they're buried, they find that they had shaved heads a lot of times because they had a bad lice problem, and that's the reason they wore the symbolic wigs, and they only wore them sometimes, and their hair that comes out of their head is a totally different color. It could be black, but quite often it's brown or auburn with highlights, or even red-headed or blonde. And of course, their statues are full of blue eyes that are made of that lapis lazuli. And so how do you get pale ladies with long curly hair and long straight hair with blue eyes, they're this pale, and then go, yep, they were black? You'd have to be about half retarded to try to pull that off. It only takes a precursory look at Egypt whatsoever to be able to tell you that the only Negroes mentioned are the ones that they hate, and they call vile and wretched and troglodytes, which means primitive, unaware, cave-dwelling people. And one thing odd, I've done another video where I talk about this green, and I went crazy trying to find a picture that showed this green, and here is that green, but this is the next generation of that green. This is a new formulation that they made that stays, because the old one used to turn blue. Even over time, it would just kind of gray out and turn blue, and you couldn't see. It was like, this is green, this is that. In fact, in the other video, she's holding flowers, and they're all blue stemmed. And that's supposed to be green because there's more flowers on the bank right there with flowers coming out of and everything, and they're blue too. But this was a green that stayed, and a special green that they had that contains malachite and copper sulfate, I believe, and that they had developed. And they developed paints that were not soluble in water, and that they could be affixed, and they would hold their coloration. If you'll see my video on scribes of Egypt, it describes a scribe telling you his knowledge of colors, shapes, how to draw the human form, all those type of things. You don't see any of this art like this anywhere in Africa except for here in Egypt, And you see some stuff that's kind of like this in northern Africa, but that was always Caucasians too, though. From primordial times, they have burials there that go all the way back to 225,000 BC that are Caucasoids. So anywhere above the Sahara was always Caucasians, and so is this. In fact, I've got videos that show a burial in Central Africa that's 9,600 years old that's Caucasians, that all have their two front teeth pulled out, which reminds you of the Canaanites, where they would do the same type of thing that they show in all their primordial burials. These people also domesticated animals, which doesn't happen in sub-Saharan Africa, and also they domesticated dogs that they used to hunt primitive Negroids they call troglodytes, and the Canaanite hounds, and every dog in the world, except for a wild dingo, which is not domesticated, comes from everywhere else but Africa. So you can see where they get their leanings from, where they get their starting from. In fact, the last video I did showed you a Sumerian styled and exactly copied, using the same stuff, ivory, lapis lazuli, so on. as the Sumerians did. Also, the grain that's in Egypt is from there. Most of the cattle and things like that are from there. The idea of irrigation with the Nile and how to build and create canals comes from them. In fact, the Egyptians are some of them. In primordial times, when they had a flood, they left and came to here. These are the same people, a variation on a theme. Yep. And they don't come from sub-Saharan Africa. There's nothing in Africa that looks like these at all, except for North African Caucasians and the current population that are tanned Caucasians too. I don't know what makes people think that you can't go all the way around the Mediterranean, but as you come down by Jerusalem and into the Levant and into the edge of Egypt, there's no big wall or anything stopping you. And you can go right around the water and just keep going around all the way up to the point of Gibraltar without there any problem whatsoever. You end up in Morocco. No problem whatsoever. Now, the problem is going south from there, because after 150, 200 miles, it starts to run into the Sahara Desert, which is hundreds of miles deep and pretty much impassable. So the border and barrier there wasn't from keeping white people from going into North Africa or Egypt. It was keeping black people from coming into there. Their only outlet was to come down into Egypt from what is known as Upper Egypt, but it is, of course, the southern part, up the Nile, way up the Nile, and that's where they always fought them at. There was really no way to come across the desert in that side angle that was over there. They coined the name desert because it was Desheret, and Desheret became what we call desert today. One more look at this guy, though, Seti. Now here's a picture. It's a black and white, done long ago. I believe this one was taken in 1912, something like that. And this is Seti, and you can see his stern, Greeky, Caucasian jaw there. But notice how thin his lips are and his aquiline nose. Even though they pulled his brains out through his nose, and a lot of these people got deformed from that, he looks pretty damn good. He's smooth around on his head and almost looks like a statue somewhat. But you can't tell in this because it's not a color photography. That little lock of hair sticking out right there, kind of a reddish blonde color. And it's all over the back of his ears. On both sides, he's kind of bald on top. Got that little Greek ring of hair going around the back, but bald on top, right? Let's look at another picture here. Now this is Minikaprai. It's King Tut's eunuch fan bearer. And you can easily tell that this is a Negroid. That he has smaller ears. That he has, even though somewhat of a smaller nose than you see on a lot of black people, a large flared nostril. But notice the buck-toothed and the prognostic jaw that sticks out beyond the nose. That's common in black people and not common in white people unless they have a birth defect or they're extremely buck-toothed. But it's real common on all these, and especially Nubians and the people around the area that we would possibly be talking about. And it's a well-done mummy here. It really is. The skin is still an excellent texture and everything going into the hair and stuff. It's amazing how well kept this is. But I want to mention to you, this is the only Negroid mummy that they have found to date in Egypt. Black people don't want to hear it. I'm sorry, this is the only one, and he was a castrated eunuch slave fan bearer for King Tut. And if you look through King Tut's stuff, he has sandals that have Negroids on them, and it's said that this is so he can crush them with every step, even into the afterlife. And so how do you possibly think King Tut is a black person? Whenever all through the dynasties from the start to the end, the only people they have hatred to constantly is Nubian Negroids. It's sad. But, one thing also important is the sub-Saharan Africans have no contact attachment with Nubians, Ethiopians, or anything. No genetic attachment whatsoever. They never met. And one way to prove that is that all these people had smallpox before, and so did North Africa and the Levant and Ethiopia. But the sub-Saharan Africans, whenever they got taken by the Jewish slave trade, broke out with an epidemic of smallpox that took a lot of them out. And so then they started putting them on the Caribbean islands and they quarantined them there. But it was a little too late because it got into the native Amerindian population and it wiped them right out. Yeah, and they say, well, it's diseases that the people brought here to America, but nobody goes into depth because they don't want the black people who have the feeble mind where they, was kings. They don't want them to know that, well, one of these people that were coming to America had an epidemic of the stuff. The other ones were fairly immune to it because they had already previously been through it. That's the way an immune system works. They were totally exposed by these black people, and rarely would anybody get a single pock on them or a breakout because they had already developed an immunity to it. Black people and Amerindians had never been exposed to it, and this shows you that the black people had never been exposed to anybody from Egypt or Ethiopia or anybody around in that area, and that's the way it works. So let's look at another picture of him, see if I can find you a good one. Okay, here you can see his profile on him, and you can definitely tell that he has a non-prognostic jaw, and he has the appearance of a Caucasoid. He has the monkey-looking ears, and he has that bent down, almost Greekish-looking nose, or Romanesque. And this is hair. Now, he's always shown with this symbolic long hair, but no, this is short hair. And it's kind of a reddish blonde color. Now, here's another picture of him, and I think through this, and especially its color, although you can't really make out his hair, there's very little of it left, just like Grandpa's hair gets thin, and of course on a mummy. But you can see some of it through here and sticking out of his bandage down here, and has a reddish brown tint. Everybody says, oh, it's painted with henna. So they took a few out of his scalp, and even below his scalp level, it was that color, and it had original red pigments into it, and it's possible that he was a redhead that faded in, kind of like Donald Trump's hair is turning from a reddish blonde hair into a faded out. Something very similar to that. In fact, it wouldn't have been much different in age. And that alkaline nose, long prognostic jaw, and he's a Caucasoid. But his DNA and genetics show that he's much more European than people think. Now, this is a picture from the Patah Chapel in Abydos that has him there. And the only reason I'm really showing you this here is that there's some oddities to the situation. The Egyptians, by this time, already had a curse vacu that they had, which means on the temple walls that there shouldn't be any space that's open, that doesn't have writing on it. And here they've put writing on it and stuff. Now this harkens back to a few people that didn't put a large amount of cartouches on their temple, and they lost their family heritage later. Some priest blamed it on that, so they started getting gaudy with it. Who knows? They might have been being paid off by the stonemasons, but or the painters and stuff. But the odd thing is I don't know if you can see it right here, but they're showing you this armband-looking thing that almost looks like a cup or a chalice with these little tripods that stick down off of it. Do you see this? Now this is unfinished in some way because there's two arms here, and this arm would have been here. Well, that's up under his cloak. What is this? First of all, the thing's not even painted. There's not remnants of paint, which makes it odd. But in this temple, it was done this way versus the other ones and versus his tomb. So I don't know what the significance of doing it in that way was. But look at his facial appearance and his non-prognostic jaw and his monkey ear. And this guy in his monkey ear. Yep, white people have monkey-looking ears. Hey, and that's fine. You ever seen that swimmer guy that won the Olympics? That guy's got some ears. But non-prognostic jaw. Caucasoids. It's an oddity here, though. And also his staff is somewhat different than the other guy's staffs. Has these ring tips onto it, the ankh on top. This other symbol we can't quite make out that almost looks like a fleur-de-lis bent or turned back, where he would be facing it at this guy. And a fleur-de-lis leaned back, shown in perspective. And yeah, it's just an oddity. So there's one on Seti the First. We've got a bunch of them due on every single pharaoh, of course, and I've already done lineages and a few other ones way back when, but they're getting lost in time. I've had some people that haven't looked back at my early videos and want me to do things that I've already made videos on, so there needs to be a refreshing somewhat, so I'll start doing that soon. But like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy, guys, and I'll be bringing you more information very soon. Peace.